Hi, my name is Monica and I'm a PhD candidate in the biology department at Queen's University. Before we get into my chat with Harsha, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge those who've shaped the ideas and opinions that I'll be discussing in the video. At the top of the list is Professor Dennis McPherson from Lakehead University, where I did my undergraduate degree. His courses and discussions laid the foundations for most of the opinions and concepts that I discuss in the video. Next, I'd like to acknowledge all of my classmates and friends from both Lakehead and Queen's University, who've shared their thoughts, experiences, and stories with me over the years, which has also shaped my understanding of myself and the world around me. And lastly, but equally important, I must acknowledge all of the authors of the amazing literature that I've read over the years, some of which I share in the description below. Thanks for checking out this video, and I sincerely hope that you find something of value in it from our chat. So EDII is, from the perspective of Queen's, EDII refers to equity, diversity, inclusivity, and indigenization. And what it seeks to do is to remove the barriers that many people face in academia. And when we include the term indigenization, we're also now talking about the aspect of decolonization. And that is just such a big topic. At the point that I currently am in my personal growth as an academic and in my personal life, my perspective is that it is not possible to decolonize the university and this education system as it is. There's just so many aspects of it, and it's just been structured in such a way, it has evolved over hundreds of years in such a way that it creates this system that self-legitimizes itself. And to try and dismantle that is just a very difficult process. And maybe it is possible, but at this point, I'm not convinced, so I would need to be convinced to say that it is decolonizable. But that being said, there are things and steps that we can take now to lessen that burden on people, on equity-seeking groups. And that takes a strong self-reflective muscle, so we have to be able to really take a look inward and see how we're feeling, how we're interacting, and really understanding the dynamics that are involved, not just in this colonial capitalist society that we have, but how those have actually also shaped the education system, which we all value so much.
So I think that a great way to kind of conceptualize the framework of decolonization might be to think about what a non-colonized university looks like. And since we're talking about the university in a very primitive and basic sense, as a place where education is being provided, maybe what we can talk about it is we can talk about it in the framework of pedagogies. What settler colonialist pedagogies look like, what indigenous pedagogies look like, and what the imagination of a decolonized university then is.
There is no common measure between comparing the indigenous pedagogy with the settler colonial, university academic pedagogy. It would be like comparing grams to kilometers. There's no common measure there to say, well, which one is bigger or which one is less or whatnot. I think Paulo Freire, in his book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, really was very good in discussing this topic. So the way that our university system and the education system works from this colonial perspective is it views education as sort of this little bits of information that the teacher deposits into the brain of a student. So it views the student as sort of like a bank account, and we just deposit information in there. Information is just going into one direction. Whereas when we're thinking about how information is transferred and how the societies grow, when we're talking about indigenous pedagogy, it's a two-way street. So the teacher is not just a teacher, but the teacher is also a student. And the student is not just a student, the student is also a teacher. So information is going both ways. One of the concepts that I like to use to kind of conceptualize this is that there's two types of information. You have information that is like little data sets that are like, okay, this is a book. And then we can have data information like this book has 36 pages. Then you've got the relationship between concepts or between these facts. So what does it mean? What does a book actually mean? What, the pages, is that a lot of pages? That not so much pages. you've got this now relationability, this subjectivity, and all information has a component of subjectivity to it. When you have a only one-way transfer of information, you're losing that subjectivity. You're just saying that it's an objective truth and this is the only way, right? But if you're looking and discussing the relationship between things, now as a teacher, I'm listening to how the student is perceiving the information that I'm giving to them. And then that in turn is helping me understand as well. So how a student, or say just another person, views a bit of information and how I view it could be different. And then understanding those differences. Why do we understand it differently? What is the context? It's just, there's a whole other dimension to knowledge that I think the academic system just misses because of the one-way transfer of information.
So as somebody in the university space who is not only a learner but already also plays a role as a teacher in different spaces, what I find myself doing in many circumstances is complying while conserving energy to focus on activities that stress me out much more, like my thesis. And I'm wondering how you interact with the process of being immersed into a colonialist pedagogy in which you're an assistant for people who subscribe to it very strongly.
So this is a difficult space, and it's one that I struggle with. And I think a lot of people who are not from the colonial culture, I think that everyone struggles from that. And we have to look at it in terms of, in my opinion, survival. So I read a paper, we can link it in the description or whatnot, that was really good to describe this phenomenon of how to survive in this colonial structure when you are not of the colonial mind. And that really, the number one takeaway from that is that we need to survive intact. And when I say survive intact, I don't mean, we obtain the PhD or we obtain the master's or the degree or whatever that we're looking for. That doesn't necessarily mean success. Success is remaining intact epistemologically. So the way that I view the world, my culture, that remains intact despite the bombardment that we're receiving from the colonial structure. So this could be things like, and this is one of the strategies that I've used to preserve myself in this situation, is I do a lot of self-education. So I do a lot of reading and I search out literature or people that are from a similar space that I am from. So reading things that challenge the structure of Western academia and the colonial structures. How have other peoples, because this has been going on for centuries, so a lot of people have been in this situation before and tried to remain intact in the system. So there's lots of literature that comes out of various countries that have been impacted by colonialism, to how they've how they've survived it, what worked, what didn't work for them, and it's going to be different for each person. But the more you self-educate, because the colonial system is not going to give you any materials that's going to contradict it, right? Or if it does, it's going to give you materials in a controlled way that might be a little bit uncomfortable, but is not going to get at the actual roots of what's going on. So finding literature, reading books that are going to help fortify your sense of self and your perspective and your view, despite the bombardment that you're going to receive from the people that are above you, right? In this hierarchical structure, we're in a really weird position as graduate students and TAs, where we are no longer at the bottom of the educational food chain, right? Like undergrads are. We're that little step above, we're a TA, so we have power over the undergrads by, assigning them marks and grades and education and all this stuff. But we're still completely oppressed by the upper levels, which are, our primary investigators, our supervisors, whoever's the course coordinator for whatever we're TAing. So it's a difficult dynamic to be in. And if we don't understand the dynamics in that position, we're going to suffer. We're going to struggle. When the course coordinator says you only have so many hours to do this work, but you feel that the task requires more time than that, you're in this weird position, right? What do you do? Do you shift over into the colonial structure and do the minimum effort that will get you the job done? Or do you adhere to your sense of self and your worldview and really keep the students' work in mind and keep the students' well-being in mind, right? Because they're going to suffer. If you just do the minimum effort, they're going to suffer. So you have to make that choice. And that is a personal choice. And like I said, I can't say what is the best thing to do. I can't say this is the good idea, this is the strategy. There is no one strategy, right? You need to do what's best for you and what's best in your personal worldview. So yeah, that's what I would say on that, is that it's difficult. You need to educate yourself, and then you need to make a good decision for yourself on which structure, where are you going to give, and where are you going to adhere, right? Pick your battles on what is important to you, which part of your sense of self is a foundational one that you need to maintain, and which ones do you feel you can give a little bit but still remain intact. Right?
That's such a wonderful answer. It also gives me there's like so many follow-ups that I want to get into off the back of that, and some of those are very specific to Queen's University and the kind of labor structures that we have there and how we can improve them. But before we get into all of that, I wanted to talk to you about this sense of working upon ourselves, reading and educating ourselves to maintain our epistemological core. And I'm wondering how that has worked out for you practically. So living in Kingston here, do you go about this alone? Have you found a community with which you can work through these challenges and kind of understand both yourself and the system?
So this is a really great question, and before I go into the details of my personal strategies, I really want to emphasize that these are personal strategies that are not going to work for everybody. This is a very personal space. And this is the one thing that the colonial structure doesn't account for, right? Everyone is held to the same standards. Everyone has the same path to success. It's got to be standardized. Everything is standardized. Your epistemological core is not standard, right? It is shaped by our unique value in this world. No one is going to view the world the same way you do, or view anything in the world the same way you do, right? No one can occupy the same space that you occupy in time, right? No one else is ever going to be sitting in this seat exactly and view the world exactly the way that I'm viewing it right now. So, and that makes up my epistemological core, and as I go through life, so it is unique to me. And everyone needs to understand that their core is different. And so their strategies, what they're going to need is different. The only way to find out what works is to try different things and see what works and what resonates with the particular person. And that's going to change through time as well. So these are the strategies that I've used that are working for me, and it's still evolving, right? It's always a struggle, and I'm always seeking new things and trying things out. So the first thing I think that I did, actually I'll give a background. So I'll start with a little background on some of the challenges that I faced entering into Queens. So I come from a small community, and I come from a disadvantaged socioeconomic background, let's say that. So coming to Queens was a very big culture shock for me. It was very difficult, and I struggled hard for a very long time, right? It didn't take me a couple months and then I was fine. It took me a couple years before I felt, psychologically safe to a degree in the space at Queens. And some of the things that have helped were understanding my background compared to other people. So when you're isolated in a bubble of your own culture, you don't necessarily, you have different mannerisms, different ways of doing things. And when you enter into someone else's bubble, so like let's say Queens, which is a different type of culture and community than where I grew up, there's an adjustment period there, right? How can I get along with people? And I really didn't get along with people. And so I had to turn to anything else that I could that was not necessarily part of the university. So I had to find community outside of the university that had aspects of my identity. So finding other cultural groups that were similar to mine, that type of thing. The biggest tool I think that helped me was reading. I did a lot of self-education. I read a lot of books that were culturally relevant to me, that spoke to my identity, so that I could reaffirm my identity despite the attacks, bombardments that I was receiving from the community at Queens, the colonial culture, that type of thing. I decided early on that my identity, myself, my core, was my allegiance, let's say, was to my cultural identity first, and then I was an academic second. So I use this framework when I come across incompatible aspects of my identity and the colonial structure. So one of these examples I'm going to use is the TA shifts. So it was, to me, in my core, education is a very important thing. Being asked to teach someone something is an absolute honor, and it's an important task, and I take that very seriously. Now, the colonial system treats this, TA ship and teaching as just a task, right? I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've had professors say like, oh, I'm here for the research, I have to teach this course, so here we go. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I've had profs that have said that, which was just mind-boggling to me, because to me, I thought everyone was like this, like education is like, it's the most important thing. So when it came to TAing, I found that I was being asked to complete these tasks, like reading these papers. These students, undergrads, are spending hours on these papers. Not all of them, of course, but a lot of these students they're trying, right? So they've put in all this time and effort into writing this 4-page report, and I'm given 5 minutes to mark it. And I'm given 5 minutes to mark it, like based on all of, this rubric, does the logic sound and all these things. And to me, that is not enough time. If I'm to fully read this 4-page paper and, look at its content, look at its, the grammar and sentence structure, do they hit these points? And then give feedback on that as well. So that's an important thing, right? So if I'm looking at this and I'm wanting to guide them and interact with them, then I've got to give some feedback, and I've got to give some thoughtful, the effort that they put into this, I want to reciprocate that to them, right? So I had to make decisions on whether I was going to adhere to the colonial requirements that I was being asked to do, or was I going to respect my epistemological core on treating knowledge as the most important thing. So in my experience, what happened was my first few TA shifts, I went way over hours, because I decided that this is important to me, so I'm going to spend the time on it. And I found that made me feel good. I didn't like the fact that I was putting in all this extra time that I wasn't getting paid for. That was not good. But who I was as a person remained intact, and my responsibilities, my cultural responsibilities, were intact. Now, this, of course, took away from the time that I could spend on my thesis, and it took time away from my research and whatnot. So there's trade-offs there. But to me, that was what was important. So that is the decision that I made. As I started doing more TA shifts, I got better at reading reports, and so the extra time I was committing, decreased. But then eventually, I started having discussions with other faculty members about this issue, and some of them were receptive and said, I understand you are doing excellent feedback work. We do like that, and so they adjusted the TA shift, and I was able to maintain my personal standards of marking and do it within the allotted hours. And so this was a great experience, and I've been able to do this. But I did encounter some professors that did not accept this, that it was 5 minutes per paper and I was held to this standard. This is where some confrontations occur, and in this point you need to do what's best, what you feel is best for you, if anyone is struggling with this. Personally, because of how I felt this was a hill that I was ready to die on because it was just so important to me. So I sought help through various channels with the union and whatnot to sort of try and address the situation. And through this, I found that there was a lot bigger problems to deal with, and now that leaves me in a space that challenges me a bit more and has led to me doing more research and more reading on the side that is not related to my degree. This is a trade-off that I decided was appropriate for me. So I am comfortable with my thesis and my project taking a hit as long as I'm doing this properly, right? So for me, the right decision for me is to let my research become mediocre, but my education and my knowledge transfer with undergrads and whatnot is maintained at a much higher level. And that is where I decided that it is important for my energy to go. These matters of equity, diversity, inclusion, indigenization, these EDII issues, that's what's important to me. Education relationships, that's just what makes more sense for me. That's what resonates with me, and I'm comfortable with that. Now, that is not a decision everyone is going to do, and some people will prioritize the research, and that is fine, that is okay. I think, like I said, we all have different cores, and we need to pick what are the battles that mean the most to us, and and pursue those, and pursue them unapologetically, because that is who we are. And right, isn't that what learning is about? We're in this education system, hopefully because we like learning, right? And we want to improve ourselves, and we want to grow. I treat the education system, the colonial education system, as a tool that I use to further my identity and to further my understanding of the world. And that's what I adhere to, and that's what I stick to.